Kyle Blado.
And I'm Devin McMurray.
Today we will be discussing a somewhat touchy subject, this being a possible nuclear deal with Iran. Some people say that striking a deal with Iran would bring peace and end their hatred towards the U.S. and Israel in a peaceful manner. However, others believe that Iran will simply follow through on their rhetoric and wipe Israel off the map and sell weapons to the terrorist organizations as they have in the past. While no one knows what the deal's outcome will bring, both sides have made a very large talking point of this. We are here to do some empirical analysis and provide some fair and balanced news coverage.
This research is meant to inform people how a nuclear deal with Iran will impact what policy world powers and America's allies in the Middle East will implement and how relations between these countries will change. Alright, first we'll explain the rules for each player in the nuclear deal and what the outcome is expected to be. The deal was announced April 2nd, and the deadline for the deal was June 30th. For Iran's side of the deal, they will halt production of the enriched uranium and disable the configuration of the centrifuge used to produce it. They will start to dilute half of the near 20% enriched uranium stockpile that is in hexafluoride form, and continue to convert the rest to oxide form, not suitable for further enrichment. They will lessen the enrichment rate of uranium by centrifuges. They will limit the production to those needed to replace damaged machines, not construct additional enrichment facilities, not go beyond its current enrichment research and development practices. And about the Iraq heavy water reactor, they will limit the use of it in the production of uranium. And also, they will agree to cap on the permitted size of the enriched uranium stockpile they have, and allow the IAEA inspectors to visit the Natanz and Fordo enrichment sites daily, and the Iraq reactor at least monthly. And then for the other side of the deal, the world powers will provide limited temporary relief. They will not impose further nuclear-related sanctions if Iran meets its commitments. They will transfer $4.2 billion of oil revenue to Iran in installments, suspend the implementation of sanctions on Iran's petrochemical exports and its imports of goods and services for its automotive manufacturing sector. They will pause efforts to further reduce purchases of crude oil from Iran by the 6 economies still purchasing oil from Iran. They will suspend sanctions on Iran's imports and exports of gold and other precious metals. They will license the supply of spare parts and services for safety in Iran's civil aviation sector. They will facilitate the establishment of a financial channel to support humanitarian trade. And they will lastly modify the thresholds for EU internal procedures for the authorization of financial transactions.
6 world powers, being the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, Russia, and Germany, in coordination with the EU, secured a framework for a joint comprehensive plan of action that lays out various solutions to a long-term plan with Iran. The plan will prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon and ensure that Iran's nuclear program will be exclusively peaceful in the future. The President, White House Chief of Staff members, members of the Department of Defense, and congressmen explained why they believe that the framework for this agreement puts us on the path of making sure that we're preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and putting in place inspections to verify that Iran follows through with their deal.
Policy by the Congress and executive branch has made it clear that Congress has the final say in lifting the economic sanctions and should use congressional oversight throughout the course of the deal's implementation. Although White House officials have warned that congressional action forcing the U.S. to not make a deal could rupture the international community and leave Iran in an even stronger position, with very little limiting their nuclear program.
Gary Solomore is the Executive Director for Research at the Balfour Center of Science and International Affairs at Harvard University. He has done research and found that following the framework of the deal, Iran has diluted or converted most of its stockpile of 20% enriched uranium, ceased any additional enrichment above 5%, halted installation of any additional centrifuges, and suspended major construction at the Iraq heavy water research reactor. A new facility to convert low-enriched uranium from hexafluoride to oxide which cannot be further enriched unless it is converted back to hexafluoride, is near completion according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. This shows that Iran is allowed to continue centrifuge research and development under the Joint Plan of Action.
For the global response to Iran's nuclear dealings, the main response around the world was Gulf monarchies and Israel are worried about the bad deal Iran and America are making. With sanctions lifted, Iran would have more resources to support its allies around the Arab world. Many world powers, including America's allies, want the U.S. to make a formal agreement to contain Iran even with the deal. For the U.S. policy response, the USA has failed many attempts to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict, and President Obama still continues to talk European governments about plans for a more peaceful Israel. President Obama has asked countries like France not to pursue its initiative with Israel until a deal is signed with Iran to limit or stop Iran's nuclear program, which will hopefully end near the end of June. Many world powers want to deal with Israel along with Iran, but the government of the U.S. would rather focus on one diplomatic crisis at a time. For other countries talking about the nuclear deal, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismissed the current contents of the agreement and called on some negotiators to take a firmer stand. Netanyahu said, "Israel will now accept an agreement which allows a country that vows to annihilate us to develop nuclear weapons. Such a deal does not block Iran's path to the bomb. Such a deal paves Iran's path to the bomb, and it might very well spark a nuclear arms race throughout the Middle East, and it will greatly increase the risks of a dreadful war."
Saudi Arabia accepted the framework of the deal. Their King Solomon expressed his hopes for a final agreement with President Obama. Even though many in the kingdom are fearing the deal could significantly strengthen Iran's power and influence in the region.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu expressed his country's support for the framework. France is hoping to have a firm deal formed in order to avoid other countries in the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia, for example, to be encouraged to follow in Iran's path of nuclear proliferation. And lastly, Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier wants to make sure Israel is satisfied with the terms of the deal to guarantee the security in the Middle East will only change for the better.
Saudi Arabia accepted the framework of the deal. Their King Solomon expressed his hopes for a final agreement with President Obama. Even though many in the kingdom are fearing the deal could significantly strengthen Iran's power and influence in the region.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu expressed his country's support for the framework. France is hoping to have a firm deal formed in order to avoid other countries in the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia, for example, to be encouraged to follow in Iran's path of nuclear proliferation. And lastly, Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier wants to make sure Israel is satisfied with the terms of the deal to guarantee the security in the Middle East will only change for the better.
Russia is very against a U.S.-Iran nuclear deal. However, they're against it for a different reason than everyone else. Immediately after 6 world powers, including Russia, reached a deal with Iran curbing its nuclear program, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree lifting a ban on the delivery of the S-300 anti-missile rocket system. Also, Moscow announced the start of an oil-for-goods swap with Iran. However, Russia may have been quick to act not because it loves Iran so much, but because the Kremlin is afraid that its position on the global stage will be weaker if Tehran's and Washington's relations improve. Russian Middle East expert Gregory Milsky told the Washington Post, "A few years back, I heard one of our diplomats say, a pro-American Iran is more dangerous for us than a nuclear Iran. Putin is afraid of losing some of his international legitimacy and that Iran may no longer be dependent on Russia for business and supplies."
There are also many risks involved with the nuclear deal. While President Hassan Rouhani may be seeking accommodation with America, the Revolutionary Guards in Iran have the ability to extend their influence in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and to dominate vital waterways. So even with the Arabs, Ayatollah Khamenei is above them all. Also, Rouhani may be beginning to open the gate to cooperation, while Khamenei is always ready and able to stop it, to preserve
Also, just something to keep on your mind while drawing conclusions about the deal. In the past, Iran has been known to be a state sponsor of terrorism and sold arms and other supplies to the Hezbollah. Also, they actively fund anti-American groups fighting in Afghanistan now and has vowed to destroy Israel since its creation. Just something to keep on your mind. The nuclear deal would also impact the world economically. In 2012, sanctions were imposed against Iran's oil exports and resulted in exports decreasing by almost half. If sanctions were lifted now, Iran might need a full year to bring its production back to pre-sanction levels. Iranian oil minister Bihan Zangladesh tried to increase public support for the deal by saying if sanctions were to end, Iran would double its oil exports within 2 months.
Next up, here's a clip that presents Iran's civil society that shows that Iran's people overwhelmingly support the deal, with some added hope of more political openness in the country.
Celebrations in Iran. Just a short time ago, a crowd gathered at the airport there to welcome Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and the rest of the Iranian delegation home from Switzerland. And earlier in Tehran, this video shows crowds there chanting, singing in the streets at the prospect of sanctions coming to an end. Others drove around the capital, honking their horns and waving the Iranian flag.
We can even keep our current international...
It's unheard of to see a live broadcast of the U.S.
But there are other stories happening in the world. Joining us from Switzerland, where the U.S. has negotiated a deal with Iran on nuclear weapons, is Jake McKenzie. Jake, what's the latest on those negotiations?
Well, we couldn't get any footage from the actual negotiations, but once again, CNN has the next best thing. A collection of puppets that can reenact what we think negotiations were like.
Incredible. So this is basically what it looked like.
Yes, clearly a very heated debate on both sides.
And the puppet with the larger hair?
Is Secretary of State John Kerry, correct? Yes.
Okay. And this appears to be the moment the deal took place. There's a handshake and they're celebrating.
Yeah. A lot of joyous moment, yes. These puppets are a great resource, Brooke, because, again, these were closed-door negotiations.
And what does that mean, closed door?
I believe it looks something like this.
Okay, a lot to think about. That's the biggest...
There are also many risks involved with the nuclear deal. While President Hassan Rouhani may be seeking accommodation with America, the Revolutionary Guards in Iran have the ability to extend their influence in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and to dominate vital waterways. So even with the Arabs, Ayatollah Khamenei is above them all. Also, Rouhani may be beginning to open the gate to cooperation, while Khamenei is always ready and able to stop it. Rouhani may be beginning to open the gate to cooperation. Khamenei will always be ready and able to stop it, to preserve unity within the state. Ultimately, nationalism is a mask Khamenei can use to mask the economical interests of Iran.
Also, just something to keep on your mind while drawing conclusions about the deal. In the past, Iran has been known to be a state sponsor of terrorism and sold arms and other supplies to the Hezbollah. Also, they actively fund anti-American groups fighting in Afghanistan now and has vowed to destroy Israel since its creation. Just something to keep on your mind. The nuclear deal would also impact the world economically. In 2012, sanctions were imposed against Iran's oil exports and resulted in exports decreasing by almost half. If sanctions were lifted now, Iran might need a full year to bring its production back to pre-sanction levels. Iranian oil minister Bihan Zangladesh tried to increase public support for the deal by saying if sanctions were to end, Iran would double its oil exports within 2 months. If you feel strongly about this issue and like to contact Representative Branchin, you can call her at 888-534-0022 or email her at rep.branchin@legis.wisconsin.gov. This research was meant to inform people how a nuclear deal with Iran will impact various world powers and how their relations between these states could change. We hope that we did a good job and that everyone is more knowledgeable about the deal than you were before watching this.